Gumbaynggirr Jawan, Nyayam Matthew, Nyayam Gumbaynggirr Jamber. Baya Nya Janga Nuranga Mangu Gumbaynggirr Jagun. May we all acknowledge the ancestors of Gumbaynggirr homelands. I'm the project coordinator for Coffs Harbour Local Aboriginal Land Council, and Coffs Harbour Local Aboriginal Land Council has been engaged by Natural Resource Commission in a response to a request for proposal for Aboriginal cultural values and renewal assessment in New South Wales forests post wildfires. It's a bit of a case study that we're looking after at the moment, so it's part of a strategy to help inform the New South Wales Forest Monitoring and Improvement Program. So the background of the study is, Natural Resource Commission engaged Coffs Harbour to undertake this study. It's got a major focus question that we're seeking to answer or provide assistance with answering for this project. And that is, to what extent are Aboriginal values, knowledge and people involved in forest management and decision making? So in order to answer that question, we've undertaken various studies on site in various locations across Gumbaynggirr country, in post-fire areas and some non-post-fire areas also. In order to answer the question and with the required resources, it was suitable to put together a project steering committee which came together to guide the direction of the project in its initial stages and plan the resources to help make the project a success. So this project steering committee included members of National Parks, Rural Forest Service, New South Wales Forestry, the NRC, DPIE, Saving Our Species and so forth. And the next stage was to one of the project deliverers to collate what existing mapping that we've got available amongst the agencies that are partnering up in the steering committee, what's available to within Gumbaynggirr homeland, and National Parks and DPIE provided some mapping information, and that mapping information they provided was overlaid of the 2019 and 20 wildfires. So we had different severities of the impact of wildfire that were overlaid on a map with existing known cultural heritage sites. And this enabled us to have a look, analyse these maps and prioritise what sites we wanted to inspect first out of the 10 sites that we've been engaged to inspect. So and we're also given a sites register, existing sites register to help inform what priority sites we wanted to look at, as well as looking at the mapping. In order to successfully deliver the project, the Coffs Harbour Land Council put together a project plan that addressed the background of the study, what the main objectives of the study are, and what resources are required, allocated to deliver 10 site visits and carry out our assessment, cultural heritage assessment and fire impact assessment on the existing cultural heritage items. When it come down to prioritisation, we actually had a bit of a mix of about 60% existing registered sites to 40% non-registered sites, and we from Coffs Harbour Land Council's perspective and Gumbaynggirr people, it's important to provide, when the opportunity provides itself, it's important to make use of the time to explore some sites that haven't been documented also. So with wildfire, comes a lot of devastating impacts, but there's also opportunity because we've got more navigatable lands. We're able to walk across lands and have a look at some sites that we haven't been able to have clear visibility on for a long time. So we took advantage of that when it comes to prioritising the sites we want to look at, and come up with a list of 10 that we wanted to go out and have a look at and that list was a little flexible to allow for sites that would stumble across along the way. In order to deliver the cultural site assessment work, Coffs Harbour and District Local Aboriginal Land Council put together their own cultural impact survey team led by a senior cultural heritage site officer. So we had Uncle Ian Brown lead a team of 3 to 4 junior cultural site officers each day that we went out for a site assessment. This would provide that senior mentorship as we're undertaking the site investigations, and provide that opportunity to that knowledge handover and skills handover over time to develop junior site officers into more senior based recognised roles.
My name's Ian Brown. I'm a Gumbaynggirr man. I'm originally northern Gumbaynggirr, actually, top end of Gumbaynggirr, a place called Jack Adri, Kangi, on the wider highway. That's where my family comes from. So my job now is for me to take my younger assistants out, the younger fellows now, the trainees. They will follow me now when I go out for surveys, and I can teach them how to identify artefacts and how to go about what they have to do for protection and for protection of themselves as well. How to respect the landscape, how to read the landscape, and pass on the knowledge that I have. I belong to the land doesn't belong to me.
My name is Narina Jodie Kimberly Ferguson. I am a Gumbaynggirr woman. Was born in Coffs Harbour and grew up in Coffs Harbour. My great-great-grandfather, he is a Bunjalung and Gumbaynggirr man. He's a clever man. My grandfather was a clever man, and pretty much. I work at the Aboriginal Land Council. I've worked there for 4 years now, being a junior ranger pretty much, and learning off Dan Flanders, Uncle Mark and Uncle Brownie, which was really good, and
hello, I'm Nathan Smith. I'm a Gumbaynggirr man of the Flanders mob, and from up around Bowraville. I've been doing bush regeneration for the past 7 or 8 years, and I'm the lead ranger of the Gumbaynggirr IPA Land and Sea Ranger team, working through the Coffs Harbour Land Council, Local Aboriginal Land Council.
G'day, my name is Reese Brown. I'm from Gumbaynggirr country, from Coffs Harbour, and I grew up with Garvey elders and got passed down a bit of knowledge from the Garvey elders.
Hi, my name is Lawana Ferguson. I'm from Gumbaynggirr country, Coffs Harbour Jetty, born and bred, and I work for the Aboriginal Land Council for Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Site Officer.
My name is Tamika Buchanan. I'm 33 years old. I am a Gumbaynggirr woman from Nambucca Heads, and our clan name there is the Number Clan. I belong to the Buchanan family. We're descendants of the traditional owners of the area in Nambucca and surroundings there, and we have a lot of traditional knowledge that has been passed down in our family from our ancestors.
I'm gonna go into Jarwin. I am Daniel. I am Gumbaynggirr man. Hello everyone. I'm Daniel. I'm a Gumbaynggirr man. Proud Gumbaynggirr man. Born in Gumbaynggirr country, and hold a great deal of respect towards my Gumbaynggirr people, ancestors, and uncles and aunties, past and present.
Hey, G'day, my name's Alita Carberry. I come from the Gumbaynggirr nation or tribe in Coffs Harbour. I'm from Coffs Harbour. My grandmother was from the Kempsey area, the Thungari. I grew up in Bellingen as a little girl and then moved back home to Coffs Harbour.
My name's Cassandra McKechnie. My family comes from the Torres Strait Islands with strong connection to Mer and Darnley Island, and also which are some of the eastern islands, and then also the central islands of Gumbaynggirr and Warrabeh. And my mum grew up in Bamaga, which is a community in Cape York up north. And then through my dad's side I have connection to Wiradjuri country, but I personally, my family moved to Gumbaynggirr in Gumbaynggirr country when I was 3 years old, so I've spent a large portion of my life here.
Yeah, so some of the common findings that we found out in Gumbaynggirr country, wherever we found damage amongst existing cultural heritage sites, the location tend to be on the northern or western aspects of the mountain. If they weren't on the northern western aspects, they were either on the peak of the mountain or on the ridge lines or the saddles of the mountain, where it's observed to have been much drier all year round. So you've got constant sun all year round on those north and west facing ridges. Up on the actual ridge and the peaks, it's higher, more exposed to wind. You've got less rain. They're probably more remote in some cases, so you've got less visitation. People keeping an eye on the condition of these places, and all these conditions make it much more prone, with that added fuel build up as well, to a high intensity fire. And that high intensity fire is what is causing the big impacts to our cultural assets out in the bush. Some specific examples are, we found and this was pretty surprising, we found a marker tree that had been burnt down to the ground. It's still got the roots intact, but significant damage to this tree. That's 1,000-year-old tree, we're estimating, big bloodwood. That had to be burnt to the ground, and this was within 30-40 metres of a constant water source. So, and this is on the western facing aspect. More prone to fire effects in the summer. When we went to investigate this site, we did note that there was further evidence of occupation in this area through finding further stone artefacts. So we found a few more mudstone artefacts in this area, which is comforting, at the least, to know that we've got some remnant cultural evidence of this site here that still remain. Even if this scar tree had went, we've got a little bit more that we can use as evidence to show that we had occupation in this area, known campsite, campground. But it does raise concerns with significant items like this being located so close to a water source, but yet still weren't able to be extinguished or prevented from the wildfire that we had in 2019-20. And we'll get to some recommendations with this, following, reporting on these common findings. So another one was, we did have come across some sites, some listed sites that did remain protected. So there's a bore ground that we've inspected that was happened to be positioned well within a water body, water alignment. So the actual structure of the rivers is what helped save this borer site. Some sites weren't so lucky. Different aspects though occurred in these areas. So it's all depending on the structure of the landscape and the rivers combined, how much natural landscape protection can be provided to some of the cultural sites that are out there. Some sites need a little bit more human intervention, human activity from a cultural perspective to prevent these impacts from occurring in our modern day age. So yeah, some of the other impacts that we've observed was in terms of scar trees, like in the high intensity burn areas, you can have trees on western north facing slopes that could burn down to the ground pretty easily in the high intensity and have significant losses through one fire, where in some lesser intensity areas we've got more of a slower based impact on some of our scar tree items and cultural sites based on fire happening over incrementally over a long period of time. So you might have a certain percentage of the trunk of a tree being burnt or damaged out at its base, build up over time. If say over 4 or 5 wildfires at various intensities, the structure of the ground, of the roots of the tree and the base starts to become compromised, and you get to a state where it's losing stability, falls to the ground, and then it's exposed to further degradation based on ground rot. So which makes it more difficult to preserve these items once they're on the ground also. So ideally want to keep them standing upright and prevent them wildfire impacts over time.
Protocol number 1 should be acknowledgement that we've been here and we're still here. And then everything else just stems from that, right? So we were here, what happened when we were here? Why would we be why would ridgelines and peaks of ridges be attractive to us? That protocol of not only communicating verbally from anyone's mouth, but we heard Kookaburra down there earlier communicating to us. Do we acknowledge and stop for a second and go, oh, Gumbaynggirr? And then do we appreciate what Kookaburra doing there with us? He don't need to be there, he could be anywhere, but he come there. And all these Junoi Jeebing dancing around the trees down there. These are protocols that our ancestors are telling us and talking to us.
Just like to talk about a bit of a reflection of some of the old ways, old traditional methods, and the way things were pre-settlement. Just to reflect about how cultural items were managed back in the day, and the landscapes were managed, and all them cultural resources. So just looking back, many more families, rangers and fire practitioners would have been around back then. So modern day society, there's a whole range of activities that are in addition to what we had pre-European, which stretches the indigenous resources out, and with these additional interests, it competes against the traditional roles that we once had, which does impact on what happens to our landscapes and to our cultural items. That capacity that we had pre-European to look after our items, it needs to be re-established in some way, in some modern way. We really do sort of see that as part of the answer to re-establishing those responsibilities and traditional roles that we had, to look after items, to assign ownership of cultural items. So it was pretty simple, the way responsibility was handed down pre-European. So starts with the totem.
Traditionally, everybody was given a totem. And that totem might everybody thinks when you say totem, I think, an animal. But not everybody has an animal totem, so there are plant totems as well. The totem is, it's your job to protect that totem.
You get old enough, mature enough to be handed a totem to your family line, and you look after that animal species, that totemic species, all your life. You might have 1, 2, 3 or 4, depending on the level of responsibility and your capacity growing up. In terms of myself, my totem traditionally is the black snake.
My totem is the red bellies black snake.
Mine is the crow. I can't hurt him, I can look after him.
Some of my totems through my mother's side of the family are the frigate bird and also the hammerhead shark, and then through my dad's side is the goanna.
My totem is the dolphin and the turtle.
Yeah, as Dad always said, Wago, that's my totem.
My totem is the black cockatoo and the black eagle, so I look after them and they tell me when it's going to rain pretty much, and how to maintain around their areas and their food pretty much, and how their bush tucker that they eat is important to them, and that's their main food and that they need it pretty much.
The animal that you're given traditionally, that's your strongest, that's where you got the strongest connection with, that you look after that animal with all your heart.
The land is everything, there's nothing else in the world. So I have to look after this place. I have a duty of care in it. We all do, as Aboriginal people, have like a duty of care to the landscape and the earth and everything that belongs to it.
Through those kinships and those laws that we had, that it would always look at the best way to manage country and manage our species and our cultural items, and all our social norms were developed on that, integrated with that, so that we're all living as one and looking, caring for country as one, and the responsibilities aren't lost.
They knew how to follow the moon, the flora and the fauna, so that it all worked into the one.
There's so much that we all could lean forward into another way of doing that's so ancient that it still mesmerises us about the bark on these trees, and the distance of the base tells me that this root system here is connected to this root system here. And these things make us seats to sit on, gives us our houses, makes us warm with fire, gives us our spears and coolamans to carry babies and berries. As a collective community of consciousness, we all become awake then. It's like an imagination system, but guided by the ancestors.
Pre-European, cultural sites and responsibilities were assigned to family members at an early age. So, the responsibilities were clearly defined. Simple as saying, protect this scar tree, protect this animal, protect this rock art, protect this place. This was the kind of language that was used, very simple. And if the young person, usually that responsibility would be given at a time where the young person had observed their uncle or their elder looking after this place themselves, until they get to a point of continuing observation, of knowing how to do it themselves through watching, and they were then given that responsibility. If they were unsure or uncertain, they would go back and ask their uncle. They knew that uncle or the auntie knew how to look after that place. And then so they learn off their elders that way. Mentorship was always there, always available.
I was about 15 when I started working with Garby elders, and working with my dad when he was working with the Lands Council and stuff, just going to work with him, getting taught a bit about artefacts and stuff. I've been given the responsibility to look after a certain scar tree and a grave site.
One of the big protocols I reckon in that yarn, Uncle, is that we've got to learn to say darung dang wajau. We've got to start saying thank you a bit more. You know, and when when she hears us, she come and give us an indication that I heard that, son. You know, and so we just see that as a bird, right? But for me and yourself, we see that more than just a bird. It's a yarn that country talks to us in a different way.
Gives you that clarification.
Gives you that clarity. Gives you that acknowledgement that.
Confident.
Yeah, your headspace is becoming more clear, and you're starting to see us and hear us in such a way where we got you and you got us if you lean into us.
We didn't muck around too much down in the valleys on a side of a cliff sort of thing, but what the old people did do is made it easy for themselves, use their own, use the old walking tracks, the old songline tracks, going from campsite to campsite, and most of these tracks were along ridge lines of mountains. This one here that we're sitting at is an old ridge line. We've found evidence of stone making that's occurred here, so we know it's been an area that's been sat around and potential old campsite back in the day, and we've got to get to this spot, and this is on top of a mountain, so the easiest way down and up and across and away is along them ridge lines where the vegetation's not as thick, and what made it easier to navigate and travel is putting that cultural fire through, and all they do is walk along those old tracks, put the fire either side, let it trickle down the valley the right time of year. It wouldn't be too hot, and until it just puts itself out in the wetness of the valley, in that more rainforesty parts of the slopes where that wet understory is, and that's all it took. And going from campsite to campsite, and what our old people did traditionally was, our yearly calendar, or it may have been over 3-4 year period, was our calendar was based on a ceremony. So we'd go from site to site based on ceremonial events, not necessarily for food. The food's everywhere. We can find food everywhere, but the calendar was based on the ceremonial events. So we've got increased sites. We've got sacred milal sites all over Gumbaynggirr country, and in order to enhance the ecology, the land, our connection with the land in spirit, our ancestors would perform these ceremonies from time to time, and will make that physical effort to walk from one place to another to perform that ceremony. Gather our food around there, maybe put a few fires along the way to make sure that next time we walk that track it's going to be nice and easy to walk, easy to navigate. Once we get to the campsite for the night, put a fire in there so it's nice and warm under our backs. Next morning we would have went down a little bit further from, wake up early morning for a hunt. It was a way we farmed. It was a way that we circulated and planned our food resources, but it was all based on that ceremonial calendar, going from site to site, performing the essential ceremonies that we did to enhance and provide that metaphysical element, that spiritual element, to put into each of our species that are out there. We had increased sites for all the species. We've got Nungu not too far out to the east. We've got a lightning mirror, which is the more sacred one, out to the west. We've got Dungir mirror, Dungir sacred places, increased sites, Stingray sacred places, and increased sites. And all these places, and these animals, they had cultural resources themselves, but also we had totemic connections to them, kinship structure, connections through families.
Australia was built on fire. The plants were built on fire. So you can't stop something that's happened for thousands and thousands of years. We have that forest rubbish and fuel has to be reduced every year or every fire season for that area.
The additional way is being able to learn of country, but back when our ancestors would go, okay, the animals are moving this way or it's getting to winter, now's a good time to start burning.
Yeah, I think every Aboriginal loved fire burning.
Yeah.
I often think about, imagine doing a smoking, you know, making a fire here and then getting a blanket of paper bark and then fanning that as a signal to you down here, and then to Emily back over, sister back over here, Sarah, and all these other people, you know, because up here people can see.
So it's like Mother Earth working with one another as well. The trees are working with the winds and the rain. See the wind and it'll actually bring, and the smoke and all that kind of stuff. So it all works in in each other's hands. It's just working with Mother Nature as well. The first European came to Australia, they were like, oh, there's fire, there's a wildfire, it needs to be stopped. But it was only just our ancestors going, okay, now it's time to be able to do a burn. But because the European was there going, no more burning.
Fire is a very good tool if handled correctly.
We had them 2019-20 wildfires that come through and devastated a lot of country, in and out, devastated homes, devastated people, devastated the whole animal kingdom pretty much within Gumbaynggirr country, where the fire come raging through.
Those last fires that went through were just astounding, too hot and too fast. Nothing could survive in that. All the younger trees, the little ones, they actually died.
Like when the wildfires come through, they're just too hot, the wildfires, and they wipe out most of the scar trees and most of the trees, so that all the trees die and all the leaves from the dying trees fall onto the ground and create more leaf litter for then the next summer or even the next fire to come through and burn the whole place 10 times as hot as it would in the winter when it should be burnt, like cultural burn and looked after.
It's a scary experience because country hasn't been burnt like it should for a long time. Yeah, a lot of fuel loads laying around everywhere, which obviously fuel again, fire, more fuel, more fire. Yeah, 40-degree day and disaster.
So these fires push areas, animals from within their territory out to another territory.
A lot of habitat burnt away, and all the wildlife that did get away would struggle to find another place to call home.
It creates more competition to survive in a more refined area.
The intensity of killing, you can actually see that they're scorched even the roots of the trees as well, and you don't really see some of them even coming back from after the intensity of the hot fires.
The fires, if they're too hot, will actually destroy the whole tree.
Rainforest species, stuff I've never seen nowhere else. It only grows there.
Yeah.
So they're all cooked, absolutely cooked.
It affects traditional hunting regimens because we've got animals that have been pushed along in certain areas, so it significantly reduces our resource gathering.
Cultural loss as well for the Gumbaynggirr people. I mean, and even nationwide, that isn't just, a great loss. Not only because we've lost all the trees and all these animals have been damaged or have died in the fires, but then there's also all these great things of cultural value that have been lost as well.
In the high intensity burn areas, you think stone artefacts are quite, resilient, but when they're scorched at a high intensity, they can actually become more brittle. And we found, just from holding some artefacts that have been in scorched, high intensity scorched areas, You can feel the brittleness in the stone, and this, further contributes to further, weathering and decay over time. Makes it more prone to fracture over time, which could potentially, degrade over a long period of time as well, and that can. The community impact over time can be quite devastating in terms of, if we've lost our scar trees and we're starting to lose the stone artefacts and evidence of stone artefacts, could potentially lose, the evidence of occupation pre-European times. So, which is important to preserve, very important to preserve for our people. That evidence, it gives us that sense of belonging and really. Makes us feel welcome to the land of where we're working at when we know that occupation has been there.
Not many cultural assets left, unfortunately, after the last wildfire season.
After the 1920s fires, the bush will never return to its former self. I don't think so. Not the Australian bush. It won't return back to Australian bush in our lifetime, or my children's lifetime, or maybe not even my grandchildren's lifetime.
After a wildfire has come through, it can sometimes be a bit harder to determine which of the trees were or are scar trees, because the actual scar themselves might have been damaged as well.
To find the scar trees nowadays is very hard because they're usually all the bark has been removed from age anyway, unless you can see the chop marks. But if there's been a couple of fires before then, and they'll usually burn the whole scar out, so you can't tell actually was there a scar there originally or not.
After the fires, a lot of them would have been damaged by a scorch and possibly fully lost from its burning away.
If we go out to a site that we've burned, and it's unlikely for someone in the team to not find anything. So yes, it very often we'll go out to a site and we'll find scar trees there, or stone artefacts are present there.
When the large canopies burn away, it creates sunspots on the forest floor, where previously it would be scattered light throughout the day.
You take the big trees out, and that's got the big head on it, the amount of light that lets in, and that space that it was taking up, which is all healthy, is now a weed patch.
With the sunspots created, we get unbalance where the floor can be taken over by weeds like lantana, or in some cases natives that weren't supposed to be there, that are quite condensed, and that creates good habitat for the bell miner, which is native. But when their population gets too big, they can create big problems called BMAD, bell miner associated dieback. So they interact with psyllids, they eat the psyllid's byproduct but leave the psyllids to keep thriving, so they end up eating away at all the trees, which then burning of the canopies in conjunction with BMAD, they create good environment for diseases such as myrtle rust to thrive. And because myrtle rust, it attacks young foliage, so after there's been a wildfire, we get a lot of epicormic growth, which is when the tree is struggling to survive, so it sprouts out leaves wherever it can to get the energy and nutrients from the sun. And when there's that many young leaves coming through, it makes a really strong environment for myrtle rust, which can then attack a whole ecological community. Myrtle rust attacks all of the Myrtaceae family, which at the moment we have two highly endangered species, being the native guava and the scrub turpentine. Myrtle rust is a fungus, so its spores can fly around in the wind. That's how it tends to travel so far. It doesn't like eating the older leaves, so epicormic growth is a strong target for myrtle rust.
Basically, nearly everything's competing with one another. All the weeds are competing with the native flora, and where the native flora is trying to outcompete the weedy grasses and the weedy trees and all that as well.
There's hardly no more animals left after the big fires. Yeah, and that's pretty sad. When you go up in the mountains, you don't see hardly any animals around. Yeah, that's what I noticed. Yeah. It's different down here because you see more animals down this way, but up in the mountains, pretty quiet and yeah. Don't hardly see nothing up there. Only small little things like rats and birds and that. Yeah.
Cultural fires is the way to go. Just better management of the forests themselves is the way to go as well.
We do cool burning, so we come in the cooler parts of the year and do the burning at a particular time. And so when we light up the burn, it kind of is just trickling over the top layer of the ground and not really affecting that layer of the soil that holds all the nutrients and the microbacteria that is still there for the next seeds to flourish from.
The one way that we know that protects known and unknown cultural assets is putting cultural fire in the right time of year and doing it regularly. Mightn't be regularly in that one spot, but regularly along a ridge line. So if we were to put cultural fire in on ridge lines, what that does is it stops fire from travelling. In the fire season, fires love travelling those ridge lines because it's the driest, highest, windiest, most fuel in a lot of occasions, and these are like highways for fire just to move within the forest system and then just move from valley to valley and cause all kinds of catastrophic destruction to all the vegetation, the ecological values, but also the cultural our cultural assets and our unknown cultural assets are out there as well.
The culture burn, that the animals will come back more quicker because it's been a nice burn, a cool burn, and where the hot burn will actually scorch even the seed sources, what's been stored in the soil. The culture burn, it's more working with the animals, working with the plants, and working with the topography and working as one.
Yeah, middle of winter when you need a bit of warmth. Fires are going to creep along the ground slowly. You got moisture around. Everyone knows, fire and water don't really mix. So. But yeah, burning a bit of country at the right time of year. Reduce that fuel load along the ridge tops, especially where it's dry.
If we have enough cultural burns, these wildfires won't be happening.
We can minimise how wild that wildfire can be.
The fires that went through it, that's what happens. Imagine if we left it if that didn't happen for another 3 years and it happened. How bad would it have been then?
We don't want them fires to come back through again. We have to make sure that they are well nourished and looked after and our bushes are maintained. And
if you know that you're doing a really good job on your weed management, because like I'm saying, you can use fire as a tool, and you can also use just even hand removal as tools. So it's vice versa really, if you know how to use the tools properly.
Special areas that we work around, we always have to make sure that they're maintained and looked after, and everything is put in the right spot and it's been notified and put down on a piece of paper, anything that we find. So even after burns, like burnt artifacts, broken artifacts, we always have to write down what we find and how it's been damaged and measure it and take photos. And
my preference is to have a core burn and a cultural burn instead of it has an intense burn. I understand that Rural Fire Service, national parks and also forestry have got a different aspect of how they like to do the burnings, but if you do more of a cultural burn, at least you can say that's not going to actually destroy everything what's in sight.
I know there's a lot of barriers and barriers and boundaries and hurdles we've got to overcome to be able to implement it in today's age. We've got fences, we've got man-made structures, we've got townships, we've got invasive weeds.
Our national parks, they need to open that bush up and start opening up some of them tracks again and getting rid of their weeds, because they just lock it up and nobody goes near it. 2 years later you can't see a thing because it's full of weed.
Intensive agriculture and livestock, all these things that are mismanaged.
Locking up my sites. They're going to lock up one of my major sites. It's an increased site. And they're going to lock that place up. I reckon we should have keys to all the gates.
Yeah. If they all are mismanaged, then they can be devastating for our country.
We need to have more Aboriginal people in higher up seats in these government positions. That's what we need, so we can see what's happening from a higher spot in that company, in that position, in that government corporation, instead of being down here so low where we don't get the information. It's no use us just being field workers where the people up higher don't even hear what we say.
I totally understand their approval process, but I do think it needs to happen a lot quicker, and that's where just gaining their trust is going to be beneficial to us.
Cultural assets are cultural items, are scar trees that are out there. Got, really old scar trees over 1,000 years old that are out there, and a lot of them are no longer have foliage in them, so that they're drying out, they're becoming older, but these are items that we still want kept for learning purposes, to protect, to visit, to know what the old practices were for our people.
And that's our history, not only to show people what trees used to be like in the day, but what damage we've done since we've been here, It's like a reminder as well.
Yeah, so it's very important to retain these items.
People need more education, They talk about us like uneducated blackfellas, but we're more educated than what they realise, when it comes to managing the forests and land,
Our old people managed to look after country for tens of thousands of years, and I'm sure they had a lot of unprecedented events in those times, and still yet they managed to preserve the majority of all their cultural items. And through cultural fire, through visitation, through respect, connection, knowing the country and the stories behind it, and we just got to reincorporate it into today's society.
We need to have more control over how they manage forests and their fires.
Yeah, we got to start looking at how we apply things in the old ways to maintain it, and there's a lot of answers there in cultural management, land management techniques. In order to protect our cultural assets in today's modern day society, we've got to start to look at becoming a little bit more innovative on how we can protect them. For instance, we've got APZs, or asset protection zones, that we create to and work on and maintain to help protect man-made structures. We've got to think about adopting similar kind of approaches and management measures to our cultural assets that are out in the bush as well. Although this tree here, it's old and dead. It appears, from a distance, it appears it could be a scar tree. It hasn't got, detailed markings to indicate that it is. But what I want to talk about is the vulnerability to old trees such as this. So, which is quite similar to our scar trees too. So it's old and dead. It's drier. It's in a more vulnerable and more ignitable state than what other live trees are around it. And that's the risk that comes with our cultural assets as well. It has them similar properties. They're ignitable. So we really got to get innovative on how we protect these on the ground. And it might look different to hazard reduction burning a whole landscape that asset belongs to. It may be how about we do a cultural hazard reduction burn, say 20 metres, 30 metre radius around that tree. So you reduce the fuel down significantly, and you reduce that chance if a wildfire was to come ripping through that part of the bush, the ashes and all the embers and that are flying in the air have got less chance of catching onto that tree, and we've given it that protection treatment before that wildfire's come. Also, other things that could lead up to protecting these cultural assets out in the bush is bushfire mitigation on the measures as well leading up to wildfire season. So that could be, if we know there's a wildfire that's out there and could potentially approach the cultural asset, have a dedicated mitigation crew that's Indigenous led, that are able to respond to our cultural assets and do whatever treatment that they can to prevent that wildfire impact. And that could be drenching the ground, cleaning up underneath the radius of that tree, ensuring that asset protection zone is well kept and treated immediately prior to wildfires impacting it.
It should be more rangers out there to be doing cultural burnings and looking after assets. And also, it's not just about the older generation or even the middle of generations. It's being able to teach the younger generations to be involved and be able to look at land, not just to see land as just land, or trees are just trees and animals are just animals. Just being able to let them have a wider opening on being able to look after their own country, and also to be able to be maybe even the next generation, or being able to be a regener or be another land carer or land manager as well, to be able to get them more involved in the younger generation as well.
I reckon they'll hold their culture more firmly, being on country, knowing country and knowing their own culture. I reckon they'll hold it more firmly and stronger and be able to present themselves more have a good personality within themselves and presenting themselves with good nature, for being out on country and be able to talk to other people about country. Be real good for them, and they can teach their young little nieces and nephews about country too, and bring them on.
The streamlining of the application process for the teams to be able to conduct the cultural burns, I think, is really important, particularly given that there is only like a small time frame of the year that we are able to come in and do a burn safely and properly. that would be really good. In the planning process, if national parks or forestry were doing a burn, to get this mitigation team on board to come in and identify important cultural assets in the area that they're going to burn, and then it would be that team's job to make sure that they're protected during the burn and make sure that they're not harmed when the other teams that aren't the land council doing the burns on the ground. I believe it's a way of re-establishing respectful, healthy relationship with country again, where we're kind of coming in and trying to get country healthy again. It hasn't had the fortune of having that for quite some time now.
Yeah, instead of the government handing land over to national parks and forestry and places like that, how about them hand it back to the traditional owners? Exactly, and let us manage that area. Turn it back into healthy bush. Use the resources that are in those areas traditionally. Then we might start getting some sort of repair done to Australia. No, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen over 1,000 nights either. 200 years to stop it, it's going to take more than 2,000 years to fix it. We've got to start somewhere, and it's got to be now.
Indigenous fire practitioner service providers in local Aboriginal land councils, different to other broader based government agencies out there, is that we're grassroots organisations that are engaged in the local community, family that are attached, they've got connections and attachments to the land over tens and thousands of years potentially, and have got that that ancestral connection and connection to country, to navigate country, know where our cultural assets are, identify new cultural assets as we're navigating the land, assess our cultural values that are on a particular parcel of land, as well as the ecological values, and then come up with the best strategy and best burn, cultural burn plan to implement fire on that country. Some country might need fire, and that's really important to identify also, and fire practitioners have got that knowledge to identify what areas for burning, what areas aren't, and also identify cultural assets within these areas. Some lands might require just a small burn, cultural burn around some of our cultural assets, so it provides that buffer zone protection just in case we do have a drought and a hot summer comes through and wildfire conditions present themselves. But with the right mitigation measures, the right people, right fire practitioners on the job, Gumbaynggirr led in Gumbaynggirr country, we can get it done the right way. When we carry out our burning, the way we like to implement it is we navigate the land, and we're with the land when we're applying fire. So we've always got that connection with the ancestors and connection to the land, and the land will tell us where to go, where not to go, and also tell us where to burn, where not to burn. And this applies at all times. So from a desktop, from a computer, you can't know exactly where you're going to burn. You might have an idea of what area you want to work at, but in reality, when it comes down to it, not every square inch of that area is going to burn, because the land will tell you what will burn, what won't. And on the ground, when navigating culturally, you'll get that result that the land is seeking when you're on the land. So that's the way fires differ. We also don't use as much modern day technology in terms of implementation of fire. So the only one we probably use is a lighter, but we'd use that from a point fire, and it'd be the initial fire that we light. where every attempt after that to put another spot fire in would come from the natural vegetation from the ground. It could be a thicket of grass, native grass that's died off, that we use as a torch to spot fire the next area. And that each spot fire will start from the centre and trickle out in a circle and follow the shape of that landscape based on what that land, the story of that land, where the land wants to carry that fire. And when we put fire in, we respect that the land's got its own vision of where it wants to carry that fire. So that's the main point of difference. And when we apply fire, we don't barge the land over. We don't seek to barge land over and get exactly what we want in our mind. We're open. When we apply fire, that the land will indicate to us where it wants to burn, where it doesn't. Intensity of the fire is much less when we're using spot fire mosaic measures in compared to using a drip torch. Drip torches tend to make big walls of fire which generate heat as they travel, drying out the land before it gets there, which intensifies the fire as it travels. And with line fires, you've got a higher risk of not being able to prevent certain habitats being burnt on the ground. You've got your hollow logs, you've even got mid-story species that can be more highly affected if you put a line burn in, because the fire will travel higher up. The plant could burn orchids out completely if you've got special species, ground species on the ground. Your line fire, where that would damage it, potentially lose some species and numbers of species on the ground. Your cultural fire, it's got a much higher chance of retaining that because it's a lower intensity, lower height, and trickles through the land, just working in and out of the species that it's coming across. The benefits cultural fire presents to native vegetation is, a lot of our native vegetation is dependent on fire. Whether it be the smoke, the ashes, the minerals in the ashes that are released into the soil, and increasing the health of the soil profile through the right amount of fire, and not actually burning the humus layer, but adding on a mineral cap to the humus layer, really helps stimulate growth and sprouting of seeds, native seeds within the seed bank, and you get that germination occurring.
Other benefit is the smoke. Where the fire didn't reach, but the smoke has. Just a lot of this plant life rely on that smoke for regermination too, seed germination as well. Not only the heat and that, but a lot of it is smoke as well.
So, some species that that also provide cultural resources when you put fire through them. You get there's certain resins that come out in certain trees, certain tree species that you wouldn't get if you don't put fire through. You put fire through, you can enhance the cultural resources you can gather. So and use for traditional cultural community workshops and activities out on the land, which is providing a lot of social, economic benefit for our community.
And a fire regime worked out and plan of management with the Aboriginal people of that local area. They're the ones that were handed the knowledge by their elders at what times of the year and what time of the day.
One of the biggest hurdles that we've experienced for putting bushfire mitigation activities in that include cultural fire is the approval process being convoluted and taking time and resources to be completed in time. So there's been some cultural fire projects that we've been waiting months and months for approval process to go through, and in some occasions it's been it's went past the time of year that it's right to put the cultural fire in. So you get to a part of the year when it's too hot, too windy, then defeats the purpose of the original intent of putting the cultural fire in. So one of the recommendations is, and innovative solutions that we need to look at is streamlining the approval process for a cultural fire, and particularly when it's led by Aboriginal land councils. And those environmental assessments need to either be simplified to a point where it's easy to establish and go through, or be exempt in some cases where that's warranted, and that's why we've identified ridge lines, the old songlines ridge lines as a priority area for burning, where up on the ridge lines we've got a certain type of ecology, but most of the higher ecological values are lower down the ridges in the valley areas where we've got more biodiversity occurring. Up in those montane areas, we still got that level of biodiversity, but they're quite resilient to fire up in those high ridges. So what we're recommending is streamlined approval processes for them high ridge burn strategic locations, and for environmental assessments to either be simplified or exempt in these areas. And also when environmental assessments also being exempt where we have a cultural asset that needs protecting. So if cultural fire tends to be the preferred selected mitigation measure to protect that cultural asset, then we need to formulate a pathway, simplified pathway or exemptions in order to be able to put that fire in with all the right paperwork in place. That's not too much of an administrative burden, but simplifies the process, makes it easier for that implementation to occur. Also, another recommendation for innovative solution would be strategic hazard reduction burns and cultural burns that are organised by other agencies such as national parks, forestry, local land services, rural fire service, to be co-designed or at least discussed with traditional owners and knowledge holders, Gumbaynggirr ranger teams prior to the implementation. So when these are being planned, we believe knowledge holders, traditional owners and Gumbaynggirr ranger teams and fire practitioners, Indigenous fire practitioners, have got some essential knowledge to be shared to help strategise and prioritise burns and the resources on the ground to develop the best outcome that we can out on country, out in Gumbaynggirr country. Another big need is to create a all of Gumbaynggirr burning regimen that prioritises the protection of cultural assets, and again ridgeline burning to protect mountainscapes and all the cultural assets and cultural resources that are within these mountainscapes. A very important sort of prioritised area for that. Indigenous mitigation crews with fire response capacity being specifically allocated to protect cultural assets. So at the moment in Gumbaynggirr country we've got one Indigenous mitigation crew that's with national parks. In reality we need a lot more than that spread across the whole of Gumbaynggirr region. So, and that comes to the next recommendation as well. We need much more cultural burning and mitigation, bushfire mitigation works on the ground all year round. Climate scientists are already starting to say that fires are getting more intense year after year, and the ability to fight a fire becomes more difficult. So the best way to prevent that intensity of the fire is through our bushfire mitigation efforts. So we need more and more of that to occur. The other recommendation is we need much more Indigenous ranger crews and fire practitioners out on country, out on Gumbaynggirr country. We've got to find a way to establish those traditional roles and responsibilities again in a modern day sense, and have the numbers and resources and capacities that we had pre-European settlement, and have that on the ground all over Gumbaynggirr country. So what that looks like, to set a target, bit of an ambitious target, but I think it's on the way to a bit of a solution. Coffs Harbour Land Council agrees also, is 10 times Indigenous ranger crews that we have now by 2030. So at the moment we've got about 3 or 4 Indigenous ranger crews across all Gumbaynggirr country. It's a big land to look after. Where before we've had hundreds of families looking after our country back in the day, back pre-European settlement. If we can get 10 times the amount of ranger crews that we've got now, so we're looking at 40 or 50 by 2030, I think we're starting to get on the right track.
Listen to us. That's all I say. Listen to us and take it in a little bit more. Believe us. I'm not going to tell you something that I don't know. Listen, please, to the Aboriginal people.